The security camera timestamp read 2:17 a.m. A man was pressed against the immigration counter, his knuckles white, his voice cracking under the weight of something that had clearly gone very wrong. "You're making a mistake," he said. That passport is mine." The officer stared at him, then at the screen, then back at him. And in that moment, in that cold, fluorescent-lit room, thousands of miles from home, the entire architecture of a lie that had taken weeks to build began to collapse in under 60 seconds. But here is what made this moment truly unforgettable. The man on that passport had already entered the country hours earlier, with the same face. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let us go back to the beginning, because what you just witnessed was not the start of this story. It was the ending of something that began long before that airport, long before the visa, long before the contract. It began with two boys who came into the world together and slowly, painfully, grew apart. Daniel and David Mensah were born 11 minutes apart in a modest home in Accra, Ghana. Daniel first, David second. And from the very beginning, their mother would say, those 11 minutes told you everything you needed to know about who each of them would become. Daniel came into the world quietly. He didn't cry right away. He just looked around, as if he was already studying the room, already figuring things out. David came screaming. Their childhood was not an easy one. Their father worked as a mechanic, and their mother sold provisions from a small kiosk near the market. There was always food on the table, but only just. The kind of life where you learned early that nothing comes without effort, and comfort is something you have to fight for, not something you're given. But despite the hardship, the twins were inseparable. They wore the same clothes on Sundays. They walked to school together every morning. When other children tried to bully one, they faced both. They were a unit, a team, two halves of the same thing. And yet, even then, people who knew them well could see the difference. Daniel was the one who stayed up late studying, the one who turned in every assignment early, the one who, when their father lost 3 weeks of work after an accident, quietly found a part-time tutoring job to help cover rent without telling anyone. Not even David. David was different. Not bad, not mean, just restless. He was the one who always had a new idea, a new shortcut, a new plan that promised more with less. He was charming in a way that opened doors, funny in a way that made people love him. But somewhere beneath all that charisma was a quiet desperation, a fear that no matter how hard he tried, he would always be second. Second born. Second best. Always in the shadow of 11 minutes. As the years passed, and both brothers entered their 20s, the gap between them widened. Daniel earned a degree in civil engineering through sheer persistence. 3 part-time jobs, a scholarship he applied for 7 times before getting it, and nights so long he sometimes fell asleep at his desk with a textbook open on his face. David tried university, dropped out after 1 year, tried a business selling imported electronics, lost money, tried another business, lost more money. He wasn't lazy. He worked, but he worked sideways, always chasing the fastest route, never the surest one. Their family, without meaning to, made things worse. At every gathering, every Christmas, every birthday, the comparisons were quiet but constant. An uncle mentioning Daniel's grades, a neighbor asking David why he hadn't found a proper job yet. The kind of small comments that don't seem like much individually, but pile up over years into something heavy. And David felt every single one of them. "You don't understand," he told a friend once. what it's like to grow up next to someone who makes everything look easy. But Daniel didn't find it easy. He just never let anyone see how hard it was. That was the difference. Then came the contract. It arrived in Daniel's inbox on a Tuesday afternoon in March, an email from a construction company based in the United Kingdom, offering him a 12-month project management contract for a major infrastructure development. The pay was more than Daniel had earned in the previous 3 years combined. The opportunity was rare, the kind that changes not just a life, but a family's future. He had applied 6 months earlier after seeing a posting on a professional forum. He had submitted his portfolio, sat through 4 rounds of interviews across different time zones, completed a technical assessment that took him 2 full weekends to prepare for, and waited in silence for months with no word. When the email finally came, he read it 3 times before he believed it. That evening, the Mensa family celebrated. Their mother cried. Their father shook Daniel's hand for a long time without saying a word. Cousins called. Neighbors came over. There was food and laughter, and the kind of joy that feels like relief after a long, long wait. David smiled. He hugged his brother. He said all the right things. But that night, lying awake in the room they had once shared as boys, staring at the ceiling in the dark, something inside David Mensa shifted. He thought about the contract, about the money, about the life waiting on the other side of that opportunity. And then he thought about the visa, the work visa that had arrived for Daniel just days earlier, sitting in a brown envelope on the table in the living room. He thought, we have the same face. He thought, no one in the UK knows what Daniel looks like. He thought, what if? He told himself it was just a thought, just something his mind threw up in the dark. He would never actually do it. He told himself that. And then, 4 days before Daniel was due to travel, while the rest of the family slept, David got up, walked to the living room, and opened that brown envelope. The passport, the visa, the offer letter, the company contact details. He sat with them for a long time. He told himself he was just looking. He wasn't just looking. By the time he put everything back, the plan was already forming. He would go. Just this once, he would secure the contract, establish himself, and somehow, he hadn't figured this part out yet. Somehow, it would all work out. Daniel would understand, eventually. He didn't let himself think too deeply about the eventually. 2 days later, Daniel woke up to find the documents missing. He searched everywhere. He called the visa office. He called the airline. He called David, who didn't answer. And then he called their mother, who called their father, who walked into David's room and found it empty. David was already at the airport. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. The flight was smooth. That was the cruelest part. David had expected turbulence, some physical sign from the universe that what he was doing was wrong. But the sky was clear, the seat was comfortable, and by the time the plane crossed over the English coast, he had almost convinced himself this was going to work. At the immigration desk, the officer looked at the passport, looked at David, looked at the passport again. Purpose of visit. Work, David said. I have a contract with Meridian Construction. And your name? Daniel Mensa. He said it without flinching. He had practiced it. He had rehearsed every question he could think of, every possible thing they might ask. He was ready. The officer stamped the passport. David Mensa, who was not Daniel Mensa, walked through the gates into the United Kingdom. For a moment, standing in the arrivals hall with his brother's bag on his shoulder and his brother's name in his mouth, he felt something that embarrassed him later when he remembered it. He felt powerful. The company sent a driver. The driver took him to a furnished flat in Birmingham. There was a welcome pack on the table with Daniel's name on it, a schedule for the first week, and a note from the project director saying they were delighted to have someone of Daniel's caliber on the team. David read that note 3 times. That night, He called his friend back home, the only person he had told, and said, "I made it. I actually made it." His friend was quiet for a moment, then said, "David, what happens when they find out?" "They won't," he said. "I just need a few weeks." But the problem started on day one. The project director, a meticulous Scottish woman named Margaret, sat David down in a glass-walled office and began asking questions. Technical questions. Questions about load-bearing specifications, soil assessment methodology, regulatory frameworks in cross-border infrastructure projects. The kind of questions Daniel had spent years learning to answer fluently. David had spent 2 days on YouTube trying to prepare. "Walk me through how you handled the drainage compliance issue on your last project," Margaret said, looking at him over her glasses. David talked. He used the right words, the ones he had memorized, but the sentences didn't quite connect. The logic had gaps. Margaret tilted her head slightly, the way someone does when they're listening and not entirely believing what they hear. "We'll pick this up after you've had a chance to settle in," she said carefully. That evening, David sat in the flat and typed a message to Daniel. He deleted it. He typed another one. He deleted that too. Meanwhile, back in Accra, Daniel Mensah was not sitting still. The moment he understood what had happened, truly understood it, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not rage, not grief. Something quieter and more dangerous than both. Determination. He called the British High Commission. He reported the passport as used without his consent. He contacted a lawyer. He gathered every document that established who he was. Employment records, academic certificates, references, correspondence with Meridian Construction. He booked the first available flight to Birmingham. He did all of this without saying a single unnecessary word about it. No announcements, no social media, no tears. He just moved. Daniel Mensah arrived in Birmingham 11 days after his brother. He went directly to the immigration office at the airport with his lawyer on a video call. He explained everything. He provided documents. He was patient and precise. He answered every question once and did not need to answer any question twice. The immigration officer made several calls. And then, because systems talk to each other, and because a passport cannot be in 2 places at once without someone eventually noticing, everything that David had built began to come apart. The company was informed. Margaret, who had already quietly flagged concerns about Daniel's performance to HR, now understood why the man sitting in her meetings felt like a slightly wrong copy of the person she had hired. She had interviewed Daniel 4 times. She had read every word of his work. She knew his mind. The man she had been working with for 11 days was not that person. 2 immigration officers arrived at the flat. David opened the door to find them standing there, and behind them, down the corridor, he saw his brother. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David said, "Daniel," and Daniel held up one hand, not angry, not triumphant, just, "Stop." "Not yet," he said quietly. David was detained for questioning. His visa was voided. The process of determining the full legal consequences began. He sat in a room with officials and a lawyer he couldn't afford, and for the first time in his life, he had nowhere to run, no shortcut to take, no charm to deploy. There was just the truth, sitting on the table between him and everyone else, too heavy to pick up and too visible to ignore. He confessed to everything. When they finally let Daniel into the room, the 2 brothers sat across from each other in silence for a long time. David looked at his hands. "I thought," he started. "I know what you thought," Daniel said. "I just wanted—" "I know what you wanted." Another silence. Then David looked up, and his eyes were wet in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or performance. It was just grief. Genuine, ugly, exhausting grief. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that's nothing. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I am. Daniel studied him for a moment. His brother. His twin. The person whose face was his face, whose childhood was his childhood, whose pain, he realized now, he had never fully allowed himself to see. "You didn't steal my future," Daniel said finally. "You only delayed your own." David closed his eyes. Here is what David did not know, what made everything he had done even more painful in retrospect. Margaret, in those 11 days, had been preparing a different conversation entirely, one that had nothing to do with the original contract. Because when Meridian Construction had initially reviewed Daniel's application 6 months earlier, his work had impressed them enough that the leadership team had already begun discussing a potential senior role, a position that would not be advertised publicly, a role that would be offered quietly, based on Daniel's first few months of performance. David didn't just take a contract. He walked into an opportunity that was larger than either of them had known, and he had no idea. The consequences for David were serious. He was removed from the country. A legal process was initiated. The full weight of what he had done settled on him slowly, the way heavy things do, not all at once, but in layers, each morning waking up and remembering. Back in Accra, their family was devastated. Their mother didn't speak for 3 days. Their father sat on the veranda every evening and said nothing. The celebration that had filled the house weeks earlier had left a residue of silence in its place. But Daniel went back to Birmingham. Because Meridian Construction, having now met the real Daniel, having seen how he handled the crisis, how he gathered documentation, how he communicated with their team, how he remained composed while his entire professional opportunity was under threat, offered him the contract. All 12 months, plus a conversation about what might come after. Margaret sat across from him in the same glass-walled office and said, "The circumstances were extraordinary, but the way you responded to them told us everything we needed to know about who you are." Daniel nodded once. He didn't say much. He rarely did. David went home and spent a long time sitting with what he had done, not performing regret, actually feeling it, the kind that doesn't resolve quickly or cleanly, that asks something real of you before it begins to fade. He started over. Slower this time, without shortcuts. He found work. Small, undramatic, honest work. He called Daniel every week. At first, Daniel answered briefly. Then, gradually, longer. The conversations were careful at first. 2 people handling something fragile. But they were conversations. They continued, because they were brothers. And some things survive even the worst of what we do to each other, if we're willing to do the difficult work of letting them. In the end, the greatest journeys are not the ones we steal from someone else's life. They are the ones we earn. Slowly, honestly, with our own hands and our own name. Now let us hear from you. Could you forgive a sibling who betrayed you the way David betrayed Daniel? Was David simply desperate, or was he something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. These conversations are what make this community worth coming to every week. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something true about ambition and identity and the cost of shortcuts, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories that pull back the curtain on the hidden truths of human nature. Every single week, we bring you narratives that stay with you long after you've finished watching. Because the stories that matter most are the ones that hold up a mirror and ask you what you see.